Thank you all for being here. It's Thursday, so you've made it thus far through the conference, which is awesome. Almost done and almost headed back home. Today we're going to be talking about HR and how Warmerdam has really revamped their entire HR process, how they have applicants apply, and how they onboard their folks. As far as the notes or say in the handbook, we're going to talk about systemizing HR records for easy search and retrieval. We're going to talk about creating or increasing transparent communication across the organization, which they do have a very distributed organization. So Laserfiche has really helped with that, utilizing workflow, and then also extended integrations to both their payroll software and their ERP. Relative to more technical related questions, I do have my solutions expert here at from Appleby and Company here as well. So at the end of the presentation, if there are any questions that are specific to technical integration, John's available for those questions. So a little bit about Appleby and Company. We're actually a partner of Laserfiche, a value-added reseller based in Fresno, California. We're family-owned. We've actually been doing investigations and record reproduction for about 60 years and content management for the last 20 and change. We currently manage about 45 content management customers, all very different and unique requirements that we've built and designed solutions for. And I'm going to turn it over to Russ now, and he can talk a little bit about the award-winning. They actually won a Run Smarter award this year for this solution that you're about to see. And he's a great guy, avid surfer, and a great Laserfiche visionary. Russ?
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about Warmerdam Packing and try to tie in Fast and Furious, Warmerdam Packing, and Laserfiche by talking about a specific event that occurred at Warmerdam Packing. Just to let you know, it's a family-owned and managed farming operation in Hanford, California. We oversee about 1,500 acres of cherries, nectarines, peaches, plum cherries, and kiwis. We're one of the largest employers at a specific period in time. That's during our cherry season in Hanford, in Kings County. We employ up to 1,500 to 2,500 employees. I explained to people about our business is that we do a year's worth of business in a month. Our cherry season is our entire year, and it lasts 4 weeks. To give you a perspective of that, I'm going to talk about a specific event that occurred mid-cherry season last year. It was a Wednesday evening. We had 2 cherry lines going. They were running 20 hours a day. A cherry line is a production facility that takes a cherry from a bin and ends up in a box. It's a series of flumes and computers. It's a very elaborate system. And we run them 20 hours a day, 2 of them. And about Wednesday night, we got an order from an exporter that wanted to load a cargo haul of a 747 and fly it to Seoul, Korea. One order, 8,000 boxes, and we had to fill it by, I think, Saturday. So the next day, Thursday morning, we had about 300 to 400 people picking cherries in our field. The cherries were coming into the packing facilities. Each packing line had 150 people packing the cherries. We packed for 20 hours on Thursday. We packed for 20 hours on Friday. By Friday evening, the order was complete. Saturday morning, the order was on trucks going to LAX. Saturday afternoon, it was being loaded in the belly of a 747. Korean Airlines took off Saturday evening, and Monday morning, people in Seoul, Korea were enjoying fresh California cherries picked 5 days earlier. That process took, people in Korea probably thought they just appeared at the supermarket like we do, but that process took about 1,000 people to accomplish. If you flash back 1 month prior to that, and you walked in those cherry lines, you would hear crickets. There was not one person in those cherry lines a month prior. But at the same time, our company, our people in HR and our people in production and our managers were onboarding via Laserfiche approximately 1,500 people electronically. So that just gives you a kind of a scenario of what we had to accomplish to get to fulfill that order. Next, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, why enterprise contract management? Onboarding 2,000 employees in 3 weeks is a nightmare. Our goal relative to EMC were to reduce the manual processing, eliminate duplicate data entry, and increase efficiencies across the organization. Before Laserfiche, if we look back to our season 2013, that same period when we were onboarding people via Laserfiche electronically, if we look back 2 years, we were receiving about 2,500 paper applications. We had to distribute those applications through 3 approval processes. We had to go through recruiting. We had to go through human resources. We had to submit our applications to our various department heads for hire. And then once we determined they were hired, we had to create onboarding packets, which the employee was signing I-9s, W-4s, and safety handbook. And then after all that was done, we had to take all that paper and create HR files. And each employee had to be manually entered into our accounting system, which is Famous and Kronos. So in viewing that process in 2013, I kind of looked at it and said, geez, we're moving a lot of paper around. We had a whole team of people doing that. It took 3 weeks. And I went to the owners and said, could we do this electronically? And the response to me was, sure. So I went, at that point in time, I went looking for, I really didn't know much about dock management, but I went to the Tulare Farm Show looking for a company that would represent a dock management process, and I found Appleby at the Tulare Farm Show. It's the largest farm show in the world, I think. It's just in case you wanted to know that. Anyway, so the challenges that we had a paper-driven process. It was manual. It was repetitive. We were going over the same thing over and over again. We had communication. We had to communicate the applicant to various departments, and we had to communicate it back to HR. So we had communication going back and forth, and the time to do that took from an applicant to actually an onboarding a person 3 weeks, and we had to prepare in that time to pack 8,000 boxes to get an air shot to Korea. So we didn't have much time to get that done. Well, the solutions was Laserfiche. Online forms, it's standardized capturing of information, gave online access, usable metadata for future processing. We used the workflow to process that communication. Now, instead of delivering applications, it went through workflow that we could approve an application and send it on to a department head and say, this one's been approved for hire for a forklift driver. He would say, yes, he has, and he would send it back through workflow back to HR, and we would set up the hire date and the orientation. Now in onboarding, we auto-populate all of our documents for e-signature. So instead of having to create those documents, take the initial application, and we auto-populate all the information. So an employee signs all the documents on an e-copy, so there's no paperwork. And instead of setting up new HR files, we have existing HR files in the system now. And once somebody fills out an application, it starts the process to form that new HR file. So we no longer touch a piece of paper for HR. Finally, the Laserfiche is fully integrated with our accounting software. So instead of manually entering all of our data into Famous and Kronos, it's automatically integrated. Saves us a ton of effort, a ton of work. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Roy to talk about the technical parts.
Thanks, Russ. So I'm going to give a little more context to the process itself. What Appleby and John and I, we really put our heads together to bring Russ's vision to life. That idea that why are we doing this in paper? Why is this a very time-consuming manual process? Why can't it be digital and made more efficient? As content management advisors in this space, we really worked hard to find something that really would work for them. So the process that we looked to achieve was mirrored what they were currently doing. Applicants were able to submit online applications in both Spanish and English. The first level of approval went to recruiting. Then the applications went to HR, which was another level of approval. Then they were farmed out to all the departmental supervisors for their approval. At which point, if they were approved, it would come back to HR. HR would then provide the onboarding process. They'd actually sit down with one of the applicants, go through that process, and bring them, actually onboard them. During that process, we used Workflow to actually create other documentation, including an I-9, a W-4, a personnel file, where all that information was automatically gathered and bundled. From an HR perspective, it brought everything together. And then the extended integration is the push to both Famous and Kronos, which remove the requirement for manual data entry. So this is these are actually screenshots of the applications themselves. They were actually built to mirror the website, the Warmerdam's website, and you can actually access this as a live form on their website. You can go in and you could submit an application if you wanted to. All been built specific to support and fit exactly what they were looking to do. This is actually the supporting folder structure for the workflow and for their HR part of their Laserfiche. You can see that it's actually numerically numbered as far as the workflow goes, and that's actually how the documents route. They start when they come into initial review, and then they move through the review process, which have their related approvals, and as they get approved or denied, then that's what depends on what happens to the application. If it continues to get approved, it moves through this process until it goes to the full onboarding. So from a workflow perspective, one of the most manual processes the organization had was identifying if this was a good applicant or not. And one of the ways they did that is 75% of their applications were actually returning applicants. And in order to identify if this is a good match for this hiring season, they actually wanted to see if there was prior work history. And so what we did is we used Workflow to pull previous work history based on Social Security number or employee ID or both, and link those documents together so that when the document then appeared to recruiting in the recruiting folder to be approved, they already had access to prior work history to review if this was a good applicant. If they were approved, then it moved on in its process. Once it was moved to human resources, you can actually see the documents, actually how they moved in process. The status of the document was just changed within the metadata. So as soon as that document status was changed, the document was saved, and then it moved on in its process. It would essentially move from one folder to another folder. At the departmental review, which is probably the most important part, this is departmental managers reviewing the application, reviewing previous work history. They had the most say in who was going to be working within their department. They had the ability to approve and schedule an interview, approve and send a direct hire, which is kind of a fast track or a direct hire, or reject and move the application to another job position. How the application is actually structured is that they can actually apply for multiple jobs within the same job application. So if maybe they were applying for a forklifter, but they didn't need any more forklifters, it would go to the next, maybe it was packing. Then if from a departmental standpoint, if the manager said, I don't need any more forklifters, let me have the packer supervisor take a look at this applicant, they could do that by just selecting as necessary within the metadata. If at that point the applicant was approved, they were then moved to onboarding. Now this is actually kind of the cooler piece of the Laserfiche function. This was actually performed with a clerk. An applicant would come in during their onboarding orientation. They would sit down with the clerk and they would go through this form. Now, instead of going through this form in the normal sense of onboarding or applying for a job and then filling out a bunch of paperwork, we actually pre-populated this form with all the information that was previously captured in the application or from previous work history. So the onboarding orientation was merely a confirmation of information, making sure that this information is accurate. So that helped them save a ton of time in that onboarding process when really all they're doing is confirming information instead of capturing it. The information's already been captured digitally in Laserfiche with a different form. This is an extension of the same form. We also captured I-9 information and tax information. These were actually used, the information captured here is actually used to create new documents. So not only are we capturing information that's going to go in their personnel file from application to onboarding, but we're also now creating the essential information I-9 and W-4 documents as well. This is the supporting workflow to show how that actually worked. Information captured, it's going to move through its process. Once it's approved, then it actually creates documents. The documents themselves come out just like you're used to seeing them. This is a typical W-4 document, digitally signed with a signature pad. Everything now is put into a digital personnel file, including these new documents, including the personnel file, or if there was a previous work history, it's all bundled together. Really, the piece to highlight there is that we were able to take information from the onset of application and provide it to the onboarding process, and then further into creating documentation, and then further into a personnel file. So the whole process from front to back is now digital. From a clerical standpoint, now these folks, once they're onboarded, they're new hires, they have to be inputted into their line of business applications, both Famous and Kronos. What we did there is we actually used Workflow to create an export consumable by these softwares to automate that process. So instead of having someone, a clerk or someone else, to rekey all this information from the onboarding packet or from the application, which is a normal HR function, it's all done completely automatically. We've also done some great utilization with Connector. Connector is a new product provided by Laserfiche, allowing you essentially to do hot searches from other applications in Laserfiche, and that's exactly what we did here. We integrated to Famous with Connector so that any of the clerks at any time, if they're in Famous looking at a particular employee, they can just click on the little button there, and it'll do a query in Laserfiche and pull back that personnel file. That's just another time saver for an organization that has to process a number of employees. This is a great way for them to get the information that they need from another application that they're used to using. And I'm going to turn it back over to Russ to finish up and talk about some benefits.
All right, the greatest benefit, I think, as a company that we saw, we took weeks to process applications. And I'll give you an example. We would take a paper application for forklift. We had a shipping department that needed 40 forklift drivers, and he needed them hired as soon as possible. And our HR people were going through a couple hundred applications that said forklift, but they wanted to go through every one of them. They wanted to pull the HR files, and they wanted to basically submit a packet to production. To shipping to say here's all the applicants that we've approved. Now an application comes on electronically. One application's matched to the HR file. HR reviews it. HR pushes a button. It's forwarded to shipping department. So they'll see an approved application could be within minutes of somebody applying. 75% of all of our applicants are rehires, and that means that those were 75% of those people we were pulling HR folders to view. So now it's automatically done via Laserfiche. We're no longer we're trying to get away from paper 100%. The only document that we're printing now is the employee handbook upon request. And Rory talked about the laser connector. With Famous that we can be on the laser screen looking at an employee and connect immediately to their HR file and take a look at what we have on file in Laserfiche. And then finally, one of the biggest factors is we get these applications on Laserfiche, and we can fully integrate them into Famous. In the past, we were entering them one at a time. Since we installed the HR onboarding with Laserfiche, we've gone and now we're using it in accounts payable, we're using it in accounts receivable. We're starting to look at it for our quality control, because all our quality control is the processing of paperwork from one document to another, and we're using quick fields on accounts payable. But the point is, every single process that we're looking at our company that moves paper around, we know we can basically run our company with a Laserfiche process. The lessons learned, well, the first thing that we learned in stepping into this is we had to plan, and we had to set up a foundation, and the foundation was to initially digitize all of our HR documents. That's how we started. We called Appleby and said, here are documents, start setting them up into digitize them, and they took them all away and brought them all back to us on a disk. And then understanding the processes that we're trying to accomplish. To sell this idea to all the people that are be working on it, that's our management people, our production, our supervisors. We had to bring them in and get them involved in the development of the process. We couldn't sell them on, here, we've developed something for you, use it. We brought them in and said, what do you want? What do you want to accomplish? And every one of them had a great idea. So it was basically, they trained themselves to accept the process. And I think that's why it went so well. One of the other things we learned, one of the negatives we got from this was that our applicants would not be tech savvy, that if we went fully, they were applying online, they would not be tech savvy people, and we found out just the opposite. We used to have job fairs where we bring people in, and we started looking at it and going, we really don't need job fairs. We're getting 2,500 applications electronically without a job fair. After the process is done, then it's a matter of going back and looking through it again. And what we do after every season, after our cherry season, which is our entire year's worth of business, we go back in and say what went right, what went wrong, and we redesign. And we're in the process of doing that right now. So it's all about adapting and carrying the process and making it one step better. That's all I got. Thank you guys for listening to this. Appreciate it very much. And if you got any questions, let us know.
Please.
I have a question, just kind of technical. What did you use to capture signatures for like W4s and stuff?
Yeah, so we're just using native Topaz pads, just hooked up straight to a PDF file. So there's like the PDF file is sitting in Laserfiche, and then you're able to open it up and hit save, and it stores it back into Laserfiche.
Oh, so there's like just computers on site and you're doing the onboarding.
Yeah. Well, basically they brought in some more kiosk stuff, so basically more computers for HR to be able to sit down with the employees as they're filling them out and signing.
Gotcha.
Please.
Are all of your forms English and Spanish all along the way?
The application is
Yes, they're both.
onboarding?
So basically
Both.
we have both English and Spanish application, as well as all the onboarding forms do have a Spanish and English version too. So they're able to sign in whatever language they're more comfortable with.
Please.
So did your onboarding go from 3 weeks to 2 hours with new hires, or a returning it seasonal?
Yes, it's just a matter of getting an application to that approval level. So in other words, if I look at an application and say, yeah, this one's ready to hire, I send it to a various department, and he says, yes, I want that gentleman, sends it back to HR. That's just all one keystroke, and then we contact them for they may be contacted for an interview, which would not be 2 hours. It's a longer process, but you can send it to various departments for approval, send it back to HR, and be saying, okay, we'd like you to come in for orientation and be on and onboarding.
So the Laserfiche process part of it is the 2 hours?
Yes.
Do you have any positions in this process that require CDL?
Require what?
A commercial driver's license where they have to have a certain type of qualifications?
I don't know. I'll ask my people.
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment.
So it's no.
Yeah, we hire truck drivers, but no commercial truck drivers.
I brought my entire department into. So.
Well, what I was saying, you don't have anybody that has to do a drug test or anything like that as part of this process.
Not at the moment.
Are you storing your safety, like forklift safety training signatures in there, or they went through the class?
In their HR file.
In their HR file?
Yes.
So you have a spot in there they go back?
Yes. We if it's a paper, that might be a paper document, and then we just load it. We just scan it into their file.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you describe to me a little more in detail the integration between Laserfiche and Kronos? Like, how do you pull the information from W2, your pay, statuses,
Absolutely. So the question was, how do we integrate directly with Kronos? So the answer is there's not a direct integration, but Kronos has a built-in import tool, which basically takes its own proprietary file that we basically wrote a custom workflow that just generates the exact file that it needs. So using all the information from the onboarding process, where there's like, I'm not sure if you saw the screen, but there's like wage, there's all the cost center information. We're putting that into our own database. So then when we essentially process at the end of the day to basically put all the new hires in, it's able to just run through all of them very quickly and output a file that's exactly to Kronos's specs.
Okay, so is that automatically exported to an Excel file at the end of the day, or someone manually has to do it?
Someone manually does that because that was how the clerk wanted to do it that way.
And then manually upload to Kronos?
Yeah, it's basically it just generates the file in Laserfiche, they drag it out of Laserfiche and click import.
Are you willing?
Oh, sorry.
So primarily, we use the Laserfiche connector just to go straight from the HR screen to their HR file. They're also using it so Famous does a number of different things. It does their accounts payable, their accounts receivable. It's also used in accounts payable as well, so they can usually, if they have like an invoice screen up, they're able to get to the invoice and everything related to that. But I think it's just those two main integrations at the moment.
Are your slides going to be available?
I believe so, right?
Slides will be available when it's
Anything else?
So how do you, so with the W2 information, like, hero status, how many positions do you need, is that a building Laserfiche form, or that's a separate program, and then it exports to Laserfiche? Is that a Laserfiche thing? Or?
It's basically on the onboarding form, where once an employee comes in and they're sitting down with the HR clerk, they basically go through all that information and where they type in wage, they type in cost centers, account codes, and in that list, it's also taking in I-9 information as well as W-4. And from there, we basically generate, so we've made the custom forms that it just overlays the text straight onto there, so they have one, 25-page packet with every single item filled out from like the name, birth dates, socials where it needs to be socials. All the information is just done in one shot, and it takes about 10 seconds to generate. Once it hits submit, they go in Laserfiche, double-click it, and they're able to start getting signatures right then and there.
That's all built in Laserfiche, right?
Yeah. So it's storing it all in Laserfiche. Mm-hmm.
Are you scanning the I-9 documents that are used for I-9 verification into this process?
Well, all the I-9s are handled inside Laserfiche.
Right.
So we're not even generating paper for I-9s. We're taking those signatures electronically also, because it's generated, once again, from that onboarding process. We're collecting all that information that has to go on the I-9 before they click that submit, when the HR person's sitting there with the for each employee. Yeah, it's a fillable PDF using Laserfiche's native fillable PDF tools. It's just we're collecting all that information to iterate through it and generate whatever we need.
Did you get that from the IRS, or did you create it
We just download the form from the IRS. Yeah, we just basically it just consisted of downloading the form and then mapping our own fields onto it and naming it, and then just that's it.
What type of control do you have set in place? So, for example, an employee were hired, there's got the employee signature and there's got the HR signature verifying information. Do you have that verification saying there's got to be 2 approvals or 2 stamps?
Absolutely.
The next step.
So right now in Warmerdam's process, it's basically when there needs to be co-signed. Basically the HR, so the HR is signing on the topaz pad as the employee is doing it. So just like it might be like if there's a form where it's like an I-9 form requires an HR signature on it, like they're able to co-sign right then and there with the employee on the same exact topaz pad.
And there's a check that there's got to be 2 signatures, right? Like one from the employee and one from the HR?
We actually do not validate that. We leave that on the HR employee to validate that information. Because basically it's for them to see, verify, but it's easy to see the screen of what signatures have not been collected. So we make it very apparent to the HR staff what has and has not been signed, because you can just see a list of signatures on the entire form packet.
Have you created it where you can go back and do a second review for? So for the next year for full-time employees, do you send something out that for the beginning of the year?
Not right now, but I think that's probably something where we'll probably look at going for the existing employees. For them, like we really just went to tackle the process of all the seasonal hiring instead of not so much for the like the ongoing. But I don't see why it would really be much different at all. They could even just use the exact same form as it is, and I'm sure it would work just fine. So that's a good question, and that's something that we kind of deferred to their legal team, and they gave us a go ahead that it was okay. So that's something like I said we try to devise, we help facilitate, but when it comes to those questions, it came down to Warmerdam's legal team, which gave us a go ahead. There are other clients where they do want us separate, but then we just generate a separate I-9 in a different area of Laserfiche, and that's not part of the onboarding packet. So we've seen it both ways.
I happen to have a process that's not as complex as this, but sort of like that. Everything lives together during the onboarding process, but then when it goes into deep storage, that's where it just splits off the 2 documents, and the I-9 becomes something that's locked down to only 1 or 2 people that can get to it. So that you don't have to keep them separate from the very beginning. They want you to keep them separate. The general theory on that is that they want you to keep it separate in deep storage so that when people don't need it anymore.
You brought a very good question about rehires. How is the process different as far as workflow goes? So if you have a rehire, does it skip different steps? Does it go straight to certain people?
Absolutely.
Do you have different workflows for different?
Yeah. So exactly. So currently, if a department manager sees that someone that hey, I worked with this guy last year, he's going to be a great fit for this area. They have it. It was hard to see on the screen, but they actually have an option that we kind of coined internally called Fast Track, which what it did is it would basically just immediately put them to onboarding, so HR could schedule onboarding and get them signed up. So they didn't have to go through interview. It didn't have to go through all those other steps. It was just straight to that step.
So that's a different workflow, or is that conditional?
It was a conditional.